My parents gave expensive gifts to everyone, except my son, who then asked, why? Hey Reddit, buckle up because I'm about to share the raw, unfiltered truth about my life. A story that's been years in the making, filled with neglect, favoritism, and a fire that's been smoldering inside me for far too long. My name is Marcus, I'm 45 years old, and if there's one thing I've learned from my life, it's that being the dependable son never meant being loved. For as long as I can remember, my parents always had a soft spot for my younger brother Noah, their so-called golden child. While Noah basked in the glow of endless praise and extravagant gifts, I was left to pick up the pieces, expected to be mature, self-sufficient, and to simply not ask for more. I carried a quiet bitterness with me, a lingering sadness that grew every time I realized I was never truly seen or valued. Growing up, our home was a constant battleground of unspoken comparisons. I was the one who was always told to be grateful for what I had, while Noah was showered with adoration and rewarded for every little achievement. The discrepancy was palpable, and it carved deep scars into my soul. Despite my best efforts to be the responsible one, I always felt like a backup plan, a safety net that was there only when things went wrong. In the silent hours of the night, I'd replay every hurtful word in my mind, each one a reminder that I was never enough. But life wasn't all gloom. Amidst the darkness, I found a ray of hope in Samantha, my rock, and our bright-eyed 8-year-old son, Evan. Samantha's love was unconditional and unwavering. She filled the void that my parents had long since neglected. Evan, with his boundless energy and pure heart, became the center of my universe, a symbol of what could be salvaged from the wreckage of my past. Their presence in my life was both a comfort and a reminder of the future I desperately wanted to create, one free from the toxic shadows of favoritism and neglect. Yet, even as I clung to hope, there was an undercurrent of resignation that I could never shake. The years of being overlooked had built a fortress of quiet anger around my heart. I'd grown used to the idea that love was something to be earned rather than given freely. And so, every time I saw the glow in Noah's eyes when he received praise or lavish gifts, I felt that familiar sting, a mix of sorrow and bitter envy that threatened to boil over. I knew deep down that my parents' constant comparisons were not just about favoring one child over another. They were about control, about maintaining an unspoken hierarchy in which I was always at the bottom. Looking back, I see the subtle signs of an impending storm, a holiday gathering that would become the spark for everything that followed. Even before that fateful day, there were hints of conflict, moments that left me with an uneasy feeling in my gut. I'd witnessed dangerous setups at family events, careless arrangements that almost put someone I loved in harm's way. I tried to dismiss them as isolated incidents, but they slowly added up to a revelation. The toxicity of my upbringing was far from over. I felt a growing anxiety, a premonition that the past was ready to catch up with me in ways I couldn't ignore. I remember one such moment vividly. A time when I was a teenager, and a makeshift staircase in our living room nearly gave way under the weight of a careless decoration. My heart pounded as I scrambled to pull my little sister away, and even then, I couldn't shake the sense that I was destined to always be the one cleaning up after everyone else's mistakes. That night, as I lay in bed, I vowed silently that someday I would break free from this cycle of neglect and control. But I never imagined how far that day would come, or how deep the wounds would cut once I finally decided to stand up for myself and my family. That looming holiday gathering wasn't just another event on the calendar. It was a ticking time bomb. I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface, a volatile mix of suppressed anger, sorrow, and a desperate desire for change. Even as I tried to prepare myself for the inevitable confrontation, I couldn't help but wonder if things would ever be different. My heart was heavy with the memories of past hurts, but beneath that heaviness there was a spark, a determination that whispered, enough is enough. And so, with a cocktail of resignation and simmering fury, I braced myself for what was to come, knowing that the gathering would not only expose the deep-seated betrayals of my childhood, but also force me to confront the painful truth that my family's dysfunction would haunt me forever. The day of the holiday reunion arrived with a deceptive sense of cheer. I drove with Samantha and Evan to my parents' house, A stately, if cold, mansion adorned with bright lights and festive decorations that barely masked the underlying decay of our family ties. The exterior promised warmth and celebration, but as soon as we stepped inside, the facade began to crumble. The living room was a winter wonderland of glimmering ornaments, perfectly arranged trees, and mountains of wrapped presents. It was all designed to convey an illusion of familial harmony and joy. But I knew better. Inside, forced smiles and strained conversations filled the air as relatives exchanged pleasantries. I could feel my heart pounding as I scanned the room, knowing that every minute spent here was another minute of reliving years of humiliation. Samantha's hand gripped mine tightly, and Evan clung to her leg, his eyes wide with both excitement and trepidation. I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but my mind was already racing through memories of past gatherings, each one a reminder of the painful inequality that had defined my entire life. As the evening unfolded, the glaring disparity between my brother and me became impossible to ignore. Noah, with his charming smile and effortless grace, was at the center of every conversation. Lavish gifts, expensive gadgets, and designer clothes were bestowed upon him and his family, with a generosity that felt more like a reward than a celebration. Across the room, I watched in silence as they unwrapped their presents, the glow of pride and entitlement lighting up their faces. Meanwhile, Evan's small hands reached out for a token gift that had been carelessly set aside, a cheap trinket that barely sparkled in the dim light. Then, the moment that shattered the fragile veneer of the evening arrived. In front of a group of family members, my mother's eyes locked onto Evan's, and in a tone that was as cold as it was calculated, she declared, "Gifts are for those who earn them. Your little one isn't quite there yet." I felt as if time had stopped. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Evan's eyes, so full of innocent wonder just moments before, now filled with confusion and hurt. His small face crumpled, and I could almost hear the echo of every disappointed word I'd ever been forced to swallow. Samantha's grip tightened on my arm as the humiliation cut deeper than any physical blow could. That single moment of public degradation was more than I could bear. The betrayal was complete. Not only was my son being sidelined by my own parents, but every person in that room bore witness to our shame. I could feel the weight of every unmet expectation, every whispered comparison between Noah and me, converge in a single, crushing blow. The holiday cheer was replaced by an atmosphere of seething anger and sorrow. I looked at Evan, his innocent eyes questioning why he wasn't worthy of love, and something inside me snapped. Just as if the emotional blow weren't enough, the chaos of the evening took a dangerous turn. Amid the tangle of ornaments and streamers, one of the elaborate decorations, an oversized, precariously placed metal sculpture meant to be a centerpiece, began to wobble dangerously. In a heartbeat, it teetered on the brink of collapsing. I lunged forward, heart pounding wildly, and managed to pull Evan out of harm's way by mere inches. The near accident sent shockwaves through me. In that instant, I realized that my parents' careless setup wasn't an accident at all. It was a metaphor for their entire approach to life. Reckless, indifferent, and perilously unaware of the harm they inflicted. My protective fury surged through me as I stood there, shaking with adrenaline and grief. I could no longer ignore the deep, festering anger that had been building inside me all these years. Every slight, every neglectful act had led to this moment of reckoning. I felt a burning need to reclaim my dignity, to shield my son from the toxic environment that had ruined my childhood. The festive music, the clinking of glasses, and the forced laughter all became a maddening background to the undeniable truth that I could no longer let this continue. The gathering that was meant to be a celebration of family had transformed into a battleground where my past and present collided violently. I knew that as long as I stayed there, I would be complicit in the ongoing abuse, not just of myself, but of Evan, who deserved a life free from such callous cruelty. The air was thick with tension and unsaid words, and every minute stretched into an eternity of pain. I realized that tonight was the tipping point, and there would be no going back to the way things were. As the night dragged on, the festive decor and the hollow smiles only served as a grim reminder of everything that was wrong. I could feel my resolve hardening with every second that passed, every hurtful glance, every whispered remark that reminded me of my place in this family. I silently vowed that after tonight, nothing would ever be the same. I would no longer allow my parents, or anyone else, to diminish the value of my son or myself. The near-injury incident was the final spark that ignited a long-suppressed fury, and as I looked into Evan's tear-streaked eyes, I knew that I had reached the end of my tether. In that cold, glittering hall of false merriment, I made a decision. I was done with pretending that I was okay with being the scapegoat, the forgotten son, the safety net for everyone else's mistakes. I was ready to fight for my dignity, to stand up for the love and protection that my family deserved. And as the evening wound down, I could feel the storm gathering inside me, a storm that would soon break, irrevocably altering the course of my life. I couldn't take another minute in that suffocating room. The humiliation, the blatant favoritism, and the echo of my parents' cold words had drained every ounce of my composure. With a heavy heart and a resolve that burned like wildfire, I grabbed Evan's hand and whispered, "We're leaving." In that moment, the decision was made. This was the last time I would subject my family to this relentless abuse. I stormed out of the room, leaving behind a silence that was as loud as the accusations I had silently carried for decades. Walking out into the biting cold of the night, I felt a mix of explosive anger and a profound sadness for what I was leaving behind. Every step away from that mansion was a step towards reclaiming my life, a statement that I would no longer be a pawn in their twisted game. My thoughts raced, memories of childhood torment, the sting of every comparison, and the unbearable sight of Evan's tearful eyes. I promised myself right then that I'd never allow them to hurt my child again. The drive home was a blur of flashing streetlights and pounding my heart, my mind a turbulent sea of emotions. The confrontation wasn't over, not by a long shot. Barely an hour after I'd left, there was a frantic knock at our door. I opened it to find my parents standing there, their eyes red from crying, faces contorted with desperation. "Marcus," my mother whimpered, her voice trembling as she pleaded, "we need to talk." My father, usually a silent shadow, looked defeated, his eyes downcast. I could barely contain my anger as I replied in a voice that was icy and resolute, "Not here. Not now. We're done." Their expressions shifted from desperation to incredulity as they begged for financial help, their tearful pleas laced with the same manipulative charm they'd always used to keep me under their thumb. Standing there, I felt a rush of disdain and bitter resentment. Their hypocrisy was laid bare in that moment. After a lifetime of using guilt and entitlement to control me, now they had the audacity to expect money when their own misdeeds had hurt my family so deeply. I told them, "You want my money? You want my help? After everything you've done?" My words, sharp and unyielding, hung in the air as they faltered, unable to muster a defense against the truth I'd so long kept at bay. The conversation was brief and bitter, a final chapter in a story of neglect and manipulation that I was determined to end. That night, when I thought the worst was behind us, a new terror emerged. As I lay in bed, the silence of our home was shattered by the shrill ring of the phone. Groggy and disoriented, I glanced at the caller ID, an unknown number. Reluctantly, I answered, and a clipped, menacing voice spoke. "Is this Marcus? Listen carefully. If you don't back off, your family will pay. We know what you did, and we're coming for you." My blood ran cold. The threat was explicit, a dark promise delivered in the dead of night that sent chills through my entire being. I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that washed over me, even as I clenched my fists and vowed silently never to let anyone harm Evan. That call was the final insult, a clear message that my parents' reach extended beyond mere words, that their control and cruelty could manifest in real, tangible danger. I replayed the conversation over and over in my head, each repetition deepening my resolve to protect my son at all costs. The anger that had fueled my escape from the gathering transformed now into a fierce protective ferocity. I knew I had to take drastic action. My heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination as I made a decision. I would no longer be a victim of their abuse, and I would do whatever it took to shield my family from further harm. The storm of emotions that had been brewing within me for years had finally erupted. In the quiet aftermath of that chilling phone call, as I sat in the darkness with Samantha sleeping fitfully beside me, I felt a profound sorrow for the family I once knew, yet also a steely determination that this was the end. I was done with their manipulations, their empty apologies, and their desperate, tearful pleas. I would fight for my son's future, even if it meant cutting off the very people who had once claimed to be my family. In that long, agonizing night, I realized that I had reached a turning point. No longer could I allow my parents to dictate my life, to use their guilt and entitlement as weapons against me. Their threats, their manipulations, and the cold, calculated cruelty of that moment crystallized my decision. I was taking back control, not just for myself, but for Evan, who deserved to grow up in a safe and loving environment. And so, with a heavy heart and burning resolve, I made a silent promise that this would be the last time their poison would touch our lives. The next morning, as the pale light of dawn crept through our curtains, I knew there was no turning back. I took a deep breath and decided it was time to protect my family by every means necessary. I drove straight to the police station, my hands trembling with both anger and determination. There, I filed a detailed police report about the emotional abuse, the financial manipulation, and the explicit threats that had been made against us. I explained every painful detail: the humiliation at the holiday gathering, the near-injury incident, and last night's ominous phone call. Each word felt like a final severing of the ties that had bound me to a lifetime of neglect. Sitting across from the officer, I felt a mix of vindication and sorrow. Here, in the sterile, unfeeling environment of the station, I was finally taking a stand. The officer, listening intently, recommended that I seek a restraining order, a legal barrier that would keep my parents from ever coming near Evan again. I left the station with a heavy sense of resolve, knowing that this was the only way to finally reclaim my life. The process was grueling. I had to provide sworn statements, present the chilling phone recording, and document every instance of abuse. Yet, with every piece of evidence, I felt my strength growing. I wasn't just protecting my son, I was sending a message that I would no longer be bullied by the ghosts of my past. Not long after, my parents resorted to a desperate public appeal on social media. Their tearful posts, laden with manipulative rhetoric and vague promises of reconciliation, flooded the internet. They painted themselves as the aggrieved party, the misunderstood victims of a son who had turned his back on family. But I wasn't going to let their narrative overwrite the truth. I took to social media with a carefully crafted post, exposing decades of favoritism, neglect, and the dangerous incidents that had culminated in my decision to protect my family. I detailed the holiday humiliation, the near-injury event that had almost cost my son dearly, and the midnight threat that had shattered any remnants of our old life. The response was overwhelming. Many who had once blindly supported my parents began to see the reality of their manipulation. While some relatives tried to defend them, questioning my methods and motives, the majority resonated with my story. I received messages of support from strangers and distant family members alike, and with every comment, I felt a little more vindicated. The battle had turned public, and while the sting of isolation was real, it was outweighed by the collective recognition of our pain and my determination to end it. In the midst of this social media warfare, I realized that reclaiming my narrative was essential, not only for my own healing, but for Evan's future as well. I was no longer willing to let my past define me. Every legal document filed, every online post published, was a step towards a life where my son could grow up free from the poison of my family's dysfunction. The process was painful and lonely, but with Samantha by my side, I felt an unwavering strength. We were rebuilding our lives, brick by brick, and the legal measures we put in place were our first real foundation in this new chapter. Weeks turned into months, and slowly the storm began to recede. With the restraining order firmly in place and our story laid bare for the world to see, I made the final, irrevocable decision. I was cutting all ties with my parents. I drafted a final message, a clear, unambiguous declaration that they were no longer welcome in my life, nor in Evan's. I sent that message with a mix of relief and profound sorrow, knowing that while I was protecting my son, I was also closing the door on any chance of reconciliation. Their empty apologies, manipulative pleas, and insidious control had cost me too much, and I would no longer allow them a foothold in my world. Samantha and I began to rebuild our lives in earnest. The relief was palpable. Each day, as we moved further away from the toxic influence of my past, a sense of empowerment grew within me. I started to see the future in a new light. A future where my son would never again have to suffer the indignities of a family that valued one child over another. Yet, even as I embraced this newfound freedom, the scars of years of neglect and abuse remained. There were moments, quiet and unexpected, when the pain would resurface. A familiar phrase, a shared look, or a memory of a long-forgotten insult, and I'd be reminded of the cost of my liberation. But with each painful recollection, I also found a deeper strength. I began to understand that while the wounds might never fully heal, they were also proof of my resilience. I had fought back against a system that had long devalued me, and in doing so, I had carved out a space where love and protection were not conditional, where my son's well-being was paramount. I cherished every small moment of peace, every day that I woke up knowing that I had taken control of my destiny. I watched Evan play in the yard, his laughter no longer tinged with confusion or hurt, and I knew that the sacrifice had been worth it, even if it meant severing ties with the people who were supposed to be my family. There were times, though, when I wondered if the battle would ever truly end. Late at night, as I sat by the window and listened to the distant echoes of memories I wished I could forget, a part of me still mourned the loss of the family I once knew. I mourned the possibility that maybe, somewhere deep inside, my parents had once loved me in their own warped way. But that sentiment was quickly drowned out by the certainty that their love had always been conditional, a love that came with strings attached and expectations that I could never meet. The pain of that realization was bittersweet, a constant reminder of the price of freedom. Yet in that bittersweet aftermath, there was also hope. I began to see the small, hopeful moments. A gentle smile from Samantha, the unburdened laughter of Evan, the warmth of a sunrise that promised a new beginning. I learned that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey, one that required time, patience, and an unwavering commitment to protecting what mattered most. Each day, as I built a life grounded in love and respect, I felt the shackles of my past loosen their grip. I embraced the reality that while I might carry the scars forever, they were also a testament to my survival, my strength, and my refusal to be defined by someone else's cruelty. In the end, I knew that the decision to cut my parents out of my life was not one born out of spite, but out of a deep, enduring love for my son and myself. I had chosen a future where the cycle of neglect and favoritism would never be repeated. A future where Evan could grow up in an environment of genuine care and unconditional support. And though the journey ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, I was determined to walk it with my head held high, knowing that I had finally reclaimed the power to shape my own destiny. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that has transpired, I feel a cautious optimism. The wounds of the past still throb at times, but they no longer control my life. I have learned that sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that ultimately set you free. I remain vigilant, aware that life can always throw unexpected challenges our way, but I also know that I have the strength to face whatever comes next. The journey toward healing is long and winding, but with each step, I find myself moving closer to the future I've always dreamed of. A future where love, respect, and genuine care are not mere illusions, but the foundation of a life rebuilt from the ruins of neglect. In this new chapter, I leave behind the ghosts of my past, knowing that the path ahead is paved with the promise of a better tomorrow. And while I may forever carry the weight of what once was, I now stand firmly in the light of what will be. An unwavering commitment to protecting my family, cherishing every moment, and never, ever allowing anyone to diminish our worth again.